I don't have to do it because of the job I do. I do the job I do because I'm like this, but I'm hopeful, right? You have to be hopeful. And we have the luxury of being hopeful in the developed world. And I'm hopeful for my little boy and my little boy's children, you know, when they come along. I'd love to conceive of a world where we've got a thriving economy that's a low carbon economy, built on green jobs, that's not obsessed with GDP. It's taking a well-being look at the economy. I think we obsess about GDP a bit. You know, everybody knows our rivers could be cleaner, our air could be cleaner, and we're improving and working on that all the time. But at the moment, it feels like there's a real almost fear around net zero, that it's going to cost people. And I'm sure it will cost. There's some capital investments to be made, but you know, the Treasury themselves have said the cost of acting now will be far, far less than the cost of having to act in the future. So
we are on an adventure to unite the stories and solutions of the pioneers, creating a better future for all. Together, we will journey to every continent, every country and community, and ask the question, what is the future you dream of? We will explore the blockers to us getting there, and we will ask, what will it take? What do we need? What do you need to create a future where we all thrive in balance and harmony with nature and each other? In this episode, we welcome Simon Dawes, a driving force behind the Environment Agency's push towards sustainability, with over 2 decades of experience in the environmental sector. Currently, Simon is the head of Sustainable Business Strategy at the Environment Agency, where he led the development and integration of a net zero delivery plan for a complex 1.3 billion organisation, and spearheaded the creation of an expansive carbon literacy training programme for 11,000 staff, fostering a culture of innovation and sustainability at every level. Simon is a key player in the UK's journey to net zero, representing the Environment Agency on task forces and acting as a sustainability ambassador. Beyond his sustainability role, Simon is driven by a zest for adventure and challenge, a keen snowboarder and supporter of Protect Our Winters. His passion has led him to conquer the towering summits of Europe's Mount Blanc and Africa's Kilimanjaro, alongside testing his endurance in triathlons at the Olympic distance. Simon's story is one of passion, resilience and leadership, and a relentless pursuit of a better future for all. In this episode, we discuss Simon's vision for the future of the UK, the role of a regulator and how to be inclusive and progressive, how to accelerate change through collaboration in the construction sector, the business reasons to embracing the circular economy, and that the circular economy and net zero are intrinsically interlinked, and the projects Simon is working on as part of the UK Environment Agency. We also adventure through water, rivers, pollution and climate adaptation, and listen to the end to hear about Simon's campaigning passion with Protect Our Winters and the role sports can play in creating a better world for all. You can read the action takeaways from this episode, comment, co-create future episodes, and connect with fellow changemakers in the Future Planet community of action. Visit futureplanet.love to sign in or sign up. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Future Planet podcast. It's my abundant pleasure to introduce you to Simon Dawes, who leads net zero and circular economy for the Environment Agency. This will be a wonderful adventure through how Simon is empowering change within the organisation and how the organisation is looking to influence others and transform the UK to both be climate ready, but also to bring nature into the ways that it's working and be an influence for good within other organisations and other sectors as well. Perhaps to start, you might like to share a little bit about your role, your positionality, which organisation you're from.
Sure. So I work for the Environment Agency. For those of you that don't know, the Environment Agency with a UK regulator from environmental law, and as well as that, we build all of the country's flood defences for England. So we're a £1.7 billion organisation with 13,000 people, large construction client, lots of offices and buildings, lots of fleet. And my role there is head of net zero circular economy. So it's my role to try and help us as an organisation achieve our sustainability objectives around that.
Interesting. And so what does that role encompass? You've mentioned infrastructure and I guess themes around climate adaptation and other elements like that. So what's in the world of your strategy at the moment?
Yeah, so the big bits that I look after are a response around climate. So as you've said, we've got some pretty challenging net zero goals, and I guess we might get into that in a bit. Also climate adaptation, as you say. So we know the planet's warming. We're locked into a good degree of warming. We can talk about that as well. So our land, our buildings, our fleet will need to be, and our people will need to be ready for that. And then the circular economy bit is very much about transitioning the business to a way of thinking that is very different from that sort of linear approach that we have now. So as a construction client who builds flood fences like the one behind us, building those in a way with circular economy as a key principle will allow us to deliver on some of those net zero objectives, as well as having all sorts of other benefits as well.
Yeah, so you see both circular economy and net zero as being intrinsically interlinked and part of the same story.
Yeah, completely. So we've just finished doing a resource consumption footprint, which sounds terminally boring, but
hugely important, though.
Yeah, hugely important. So doing all of the stuff we do as the environmental regulator, hugely important, protecting lives and property and livelihoods from flooding, takes a lot of stuff. The manufacture and then consumption of that stuff has carbon emissions related with it, either in this country or other countries. And if we use it in that take, make, throw away kind of way, that's a finite resource. So the longer we can keep materials in use and keep them going round in the highest quality, the better it is for us. And it also means as an organisation, we're not subject to price rises as those materials become more scarce and more rare. We're not subject to the economic impacts of that. So there's all sorts of good business reasons why we need to embrace that circular economy.
Yeah, I'm super curious. So you've got, it's a UK-wide estate.
England.
Yes. And I would love to explore, to get some sort of context on what that natural world is, or the realm of the Environment Agency, the natural world that it's connected to. And then also some sort of deeper context on the types of things that are being built, the types of materials that are being used, the types of, maybe some elements around the scale, just to give us some sort of context around that domain.
Yeah, so we look after not just the natural world, but it's really easy when people talk environment, actually, people think of green spaces and hills, woodland, beautiful rivers, and yes, it's all of that, but it's urban environments as well. And actually, the vast majority of people live in urban environments. So we have a real role to play there in making those places. Obviously we work with people like councils, but in terms of regulating industry that's in those places, making the air clean and the water clean in those places, there's really good research that shows access to clean, green spaces is great for our well-being. So in terms of the environment, it's everything within the envelope of England. We regulate industry that either takes from the environment, so water abstraction, or I suppose I was about to say puts into the environment, but maybe you could say takes away as well in terms of pollution.
Exists in the environment.
Yeah. And, discharging into rivers. So the obvious one being sewage companies. Lots of the organisations around here who are taking clean water, using it as part of their treatment process and then discharging it. It's our role to make sure that's within certain limits.
Fascinating. So it's the intersection between humans and the environment, and then also ensuring that environment is a space where humans can thrive within, I guess, would be somewhat of a way of encapsulating it. And how does that then flow into some of the elements of the social context, for example? I remember, for example, reading about some parts of London where air pollution is really high, where if you can't afford to move out of those areas, for example, then the impacts of climate are going to be much higher on you than others. And does that come into your...
It does come into part of our sustainability strategy, actually. It's a really interesting one. So like all sorts of organisations, we have relationships with MPs because they're there to represent the people. And certainly when MPs get in touch with us, they have a loud voice that we listen to. So there's a real challenge for us as an organisation where who gets in touch with their MP it's people who are generally, they're educated, so they know how to get in touch with their MP. They've got the time on their hands to do it. They've got the inclination to do it. And that tends to be a certain sector of society. There's another sector of society that are just struggling to put food on the table, and they're working 2 jobs and they don't have time to write to their MP, and they're just trying to square their kids away with some food at the end of the day. There's a real risk, if we're not careful, that we just service the squeaky wheels almost. So that's something we're really cognizant of in how we regulate, to make sure we're enabling to listen to all the voices out there, not just the ones that necessarily shout the loudest.
I love that. That's interesting. Yeah, we live in a world where if you shout loudest, people pay attention to you, but actually you're not necessarily representative of the best interests.
Yeah, and particularly in a world of finite resources, as us as an organisation, well, where am I going to put my resources?
Yeah.
I'll put it where the noise is the loudest. Well, there's a risk of that for sure.
Yeah. The main framing for this exploration or this podcast is to look at what is that future that we can all love, that we can all thrive in balance and harmony with nature and each other. Initially with yourself, do you have a vision for that future? And then does the Environment Agency have a vision for that future? And let's look at that bit first before we explore some of the blockers and some of the solutions around it.
I'd love to conceive of a world, but let's my head can just about get around England or the UK at the moment, where we've got a thriving economy that's a low carbon economy, built on green jobs, that's not obsessed with GDP. It's taking a well-being look at the economy. And some of the Scandinavian countries, I think, are doing that really well. I think we obsess about GDP a bit. Everybody knows our rivers could be cleaner, our air could be cleaner, and we're improving and working on that all the time. But at the moment, it feels like there's a real almost fear around net zero, that it's going to cost people. And I'm sure it will cost us some capital investments to be made. But, the Treasury themselves have said the cost of acting now will be far, far less than the cost of having to act in the future. So that economy that's built on green jobs, that delivers well-being for people, would be more or less my vision.
I feel the same. If we look at what we may be investing in, then it feels like it makes a lot of sense. I think we had Timothy Parikh, who was talking about degrowth, for example. And now degrowth has had, it's had its detractors and it's had its people that are very attracted to it as a movement. And I think particularly the degrowth element sort of can turn people either on or off. I really feel like a lot of the solutions that will come out of that movement are, how can we empower people to have a greater sense of community? How can we have people be able to serve locally where they are? How can we have a more circular world? How can we have more reuse hubs? How can we have a load of different elements that are actually probably a world that we want to invest in and build? Whereas now, if we look at GDP as being the primary metric, we've built things a little bit out of shape in terms of take and make or transactional and those kinds of elements. So yeah, I really agree with you that having a different way of defining success, a different set of metrics to look at, means we're definitely investing in a better, more wholesome future.
Yeah, I think for me, I have to do this to an extent because I don't have to do it because of the job I do. I do the job I do because I'm like this, but I'm hopeful, right? You have to be hopeful. And we have the luxury of being hopeful in the developed world. And I'm hopeful for my little boy and my little boy's children, when they come along. So yeah, for me, that's what I have to go at. And I was lucky enough last week I was with Chris Stark from the Committee on Climate Change. Yep. I absolutely was not prepared for that to be a hopeful session, but I came away hopeful because we've got a plan. The Committee on Climate Change have literally written a plan to the government, the 6th carbon budget, and we'll soon have the 7th carbon budget. This is how you do it. This is what needs to change. This is what needs to change. And actually, whilst there's a lot of change in there and change is scary, there's so much opportunity in there to transition to that different way of being and operating as a country.
I think the GDP and well-being thing is really important. And there's that sort of broader vision of the future. But I'm really interested in what that is granularly and like what that is both for the Environment Agency, but then also you mentioned the UK government as well. Like, what does that look like? How is it layered? And then what are some of the pathways to getting there? How might we get there? What are some of the challenges that we need to overcome? For example, if we look at large organizations, one of the challenges that I see is that the level of true transformation required is beyond many's comprehension at this minute in time. So there's sort of a vision and an aspiration, but in reality, the decisions to make that change are unable to be made.
I think you're right. And I had a really lovely moment with our chief of staff when I was taking him through our sustainability strategy for 10 years. And even just when I was taking him through the net zero plan in detail. And he had a wonderful moment where he just sort of put it down and pushed it like that and went, this fundamentally changes everything, doesn't it? And I was like, yeah, it really, that's it. You've got it. It's brilliant. And it is that, actually. So that there's a challenge in there in so much as, we all know what humans are like with change. We know the capacity to drive change in organizations is hard. And as the world gets more complex and noisy, delivering change through that, it is really difficult. But that's something that we've absolutely got to do. And one of the bits that excites me in my job, so get to try to drive lots of change at the Environment Agency. Maybe we'll talk a bit in a minute about the carbon budgets we've introduced as one of the ways of doing that. But the thing that probably excites me, so our footprint is 273,000 tonnes of carbon a year, roughly speaking, which is take a view, a sizable number or a tiny number, depending on your perspective. And if we drive that and down by 90% in line with our science-based target, that'll be fantastic. But it's not that big deal in the overall scheme of things. The bit that really interests me is how can I and we in our role amplify that effect to be a system changer. So how do we get together with other big construction clients, so highways, HS2, any of the nuclear new builds that are going on, and how do we as construction clients accelerate change in that construction sector? Because going back to that Committee on Climate Change bit, that's one of the really hard to abate sectors. But humans are phenomenally resourceful. They sometimes just need that really strong signal that this is what the market wants and we'll commit to it for the next 5 to 10 years or whatever. And I think that's an exciting space. If if policy isn't there from government, I think business can step into that space and provide some of the assurity and direction.
To go through that in bits, to unpack that in parts, I don't see policies being separate from that. What we see is a lot of different humans in different roles, in different organizations, with different levels of needs and influence. And certainly I agree with you. I feel as organizations that have the potential to be beacon influencers, then our role is to not just look at our own estate, it's to look beyond that, who we can collaborate, who we can support. Because often what's necessary is in the room where the conversation's being had, you need to be able to say, oh yeah, this person's also with me on this, or this person's bringing in their either budget or their project into this room as well. And it's often that moves other conversations forward. The same with policy as well. I think our policy is often a Jacob's ladder of like people building up both sides or more than one side. So either public opinion or scientists or business or policymakers, and all of them need to work well in harmony in order for us to accelerate change at the right kind of pace. You have to be communicating through all those different areas. And so I think if we see Environment Agency and other organizations openly collaborating and moving sectors forward, then that gives signals to policy, which means you can sort of have a positive loop.
Absolutely. Let me give you a really good little granular example. So our emissions are dominated by construction, and our construction emissions are dominated by concrete and steel, essentially, which is why circular economy is important. But just thinking about the concrete bit, there are low carbon alternatives now, which I'm sure most, if not all of the listeners to your podcast will know. And there's a big spectrum that, low carbon concrete. There's a price premium attached to it. And so extremely crudely put, say it's 10% more expensive. That means we can either buy 10% less or with the budget that we've got, or we deliver 10% less outcomes. It's a bit of a crude measure, but if we and all the other people we can convene who buy concrete get together and say, that's what we want, and we'll commit to this volume over the next 5 years, we can make that price premium go away.
And now with the new revision of anti-competition laws, it feels like we've got much more space there to move further forward faster on those types of collaborations where perhaps before people might have been hesitant about doing it, because we've noticed them not only in perhaps construction, but also in supply chains around factories and a whole load of different places where quite thoughtful collaboration done at scale with intention is going to be, I think, one of the major reasons why we might move further forward. Then I guess it's looking at where those major influence points are. So in the food services, in the food sector, it might be, really large food producers that are sort of fairly, not opaque, but, maybe like Cargill or something like that, where they serve a lot of different people. And even if you're a relatively small, a relatively mid-sized organization, your influence is quite small, whereas a lot of people collaborate together, you can have a greater influence. And I can see it in construction. I can see it in most sectors, actually, where that need for intentional collaboration, very methodical, very intentional collaboration is going to be the bit that gets us over the initial hump. If we look at collaboration specifically, what components are there in for you? How do you feel that knowledge sharing and being open about the sort of challenges we're facing and the solutions we've got with other organizations, what role do you think that plays?
I think it plays a huge role, actually. And it's one of the lovely things about working in the sustainability sector that I think that I've said it before, nobody wins at climate change. We all win or we all lose, that's it. So in that sense, there's brilliant sharing and collaboration amongst sustainability professionals. I think there's a tendency sometimes to say, we did this thing and it was awesome and look, and we won an award. And, we fall into that a bit as well. I think it's absolutely just as powerful to go, we tried this thing here. We thought it'd be good. It's a bit of a car crash. I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole we did this thing. It was a bit of a car crash. It was a car crash for these reasons. We've got some great lessons learned. Here are our lessons learned with that. I think that transparency is really, really important. You saw it with Lego recently. Lego did they've been trying to make bricks out of I think it was a biopolymer that they've been working on. Hasn't worked, or it might have been recycled plastic actually. It hasn't worked, but they'd done the sums, they'd done their homework, and they were super honest about it and super clear with their journey. And actually, instead of being vilified for going back to virgin plastic, because they told a proper story around it. They're like, well, we're going to have to go back to virgin plastic for a bit until we find a different solution. They were just really transparent, really clear. Like, this is what we're trying to do. Okay, we've hit a snag. And actually, people just piled in with support behind them.
That feels really true. I feel like probably in the last 1 to 2 years, in the very fast moving movement that we're in, that's become much more prevalent. And even in the last 6 months, people have been more open about that. And we're running something soon around impact reporting as well. And the need for us to have those as much more transparent, open, collaborative documents. So rather than a once a year, let's put something out on a PDF and talk about it. Actually, how are you creating a dynamic dynamic content through the year that enables people to connect and collaborate with you on things that you're working on?
Yeah, but I feel quite strongly about this. So that transparency and honesty, and the Lego example that I just gave, and you will see some of this from the Environment Agency in coming months, actually, without giving too much away. I think that's the minority still, if I'm honest.
Oh, 100%.
I still see a chunk of greenwashing that's either very deliberate or at best well-intentioned, but very badly delivered.
And that's a blocker, right? That's a blocker to change. I understand why that might have been the case. So typically organizations would want to hold commercial secrets and not share. So I think the job that we're doing is as sustainability professionals, and sustainability professionals that has now extended to a wider group of individuals within an organization. So heads of key roles in operational roles, procurement, marketing, brand, C-suite, they're all within the sustainability agenda. So I think initially sustainability professionals instinctively move towards sharing, and probably we share quite a lot informally, I think, as a group. And now it's moving broader through the organization. And you're right, there are some green shoots around that, but certainly we need to be much more joined up. And for me, it's about rewiring those relationships as well. So rather than individual organizations, we're actually one movement, we're the natural world, let's figure out how to collaborate more effectively.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because sitting as a sustainability professional in those organisations, you are trying to take them on a cultural journey that is counterintuitive to the last however long they've had. I often get asked by graduates, what skills do I need as a sustainability professional? What degree should I study? I found myself saying a bit more, increasingly, you need to understand human psychology. Yeah. You need to understand how to make people comfortable with change, to take them on a change journey, whether that's at the C-suite level or whether it's just workers down here who want to do a thing. You really need to understand humans. And I think it was a point I was making to Chris Stark, actually, because the Committee on Climate Change are just amazing. Their work is fantastic. I'm, at the risk of sounding a bit fanboyish about it, but there's lots of technological solutions in there. I'm like, we mustn't forget the people. We mustn't forget the behaviour change. It is just essential.
Yeah. I remember working in behaviour change 10 to 15, I was trying to work out how many years ago, 10 to 15 years ago with Carbon Culture. And they did behaviour change with DEC in the original thing. And that was, at that time, far too early for people to be able to think about that. And so the consideration then was, let's make lots of technical changes first, and then we can approach how we change what people are thinking and how they're acting. And at that time as well, it was much more around how people were acting. Whereas now I feel like I see it as a human system of people connected. And so the behavior change piece is a mindset shift. It's an emotional shift. It's a change of the way we feel, the way we are, and what we choose to then do with that. Because a lot of the technical changes are sometimes blocked by that mindset shift, or a lot of the organizational dynamic changes are blocked by people's feelings, or I'm too busy, I don't have enough time, this isn't a priority, my KPIs don't match what I need to do. There's a myriad of changes there. And actually, if you win over hearts and minds and mindsets, then all of those changes don't melt away, but there becomes a different energy and feeling towards solving them.
Yeah, one of the things we've done actually, which is part of it has been brilliantly successful. The other part is kind of 50% successful. We need to make some tweaks to make it more, which I'll just share with you. So we rolled out carbon literacy to, I think at last count, had about 10,500 people do it, which is great. We had some chat at the start around, should we mandate this? We have mandatory data security training that we have to do. Should we mandate it? And the challenge from our chief exec was just make it so good that people want to do it. All right. But that's what we managed to do. It's worked. People wanted to do it. So that's great. We've educated people.
Or
so we got to 10, as of and counting, we're at 10,300 out of 13,000. But we've grown a little bit. So we were at 11 when we started.
But that's, typically we might see a lot less in terms of voluntary.
Yes, 80% So that's been great. It's educated people. It's got them thinking, and we've got loads of wonderful little examples of people going, I can make a difference in my work. This is great. So that's one bit. We've done the education bit. Then the other bit we've done, this sort of comes back to your point, is we've rolled out in the business carbon budgets. And it's a term that people throw around, and it means different things to different people. But we've worked really hard to develop budgets in the same way that everybody has a budget. I've got a budget for my team and I can choose how to spend it. Some goes on salary, some goes on travel, some goes on protective clothing. But teams have now got carbon budgets. And so when they're making choices and decisions as managers, they're making decisions. Can I afford it from a cash point of view? And can I afford it from a carbon point of view? And that's starting to drive different decision making. Yeah, I've given you the perfect, that's a theory. We haven't quite nailed it yet. So there's some bits we're still tinkering with around the so what. So what if you go overdrawn? What if you don't spend all of it? So we've got some bits to work out, but it's been a brilliant collaboration with our finance teams, because the penny drop moment for me is we're so used to making decisions around, can I afford to do this? And I was like, we need to start making decisions. Can we afford from a climate and carbon point of view to do this? Some of us do that all the time. I'm going to take the plane on holiday this year, or are we going to drive again? I haven't taken the plane for 3 years. Maybe we can actually. Not to vilify air travel, but we've all got a budget we're operating in, right? So that's what we've tried to roll out.
That's really interesting. So let's dive into both those things. We've got carbon literacy and we've got carbon budget. On the carbon literacy side, you talked about having just over 10,000 people carbon literate. Was that the same level of literacy for everyone through the organization, or was there different levels of literacy depending on their roles?
So first off, we've done a bit of a sheep dip. Everybody's done the same 3 modules and then had an in-depth discussion at the end of it. So about 7 hours of training in total. We're moving now so for some specialist roles, so our designers and our engineers who are building flood defences, they will have quite detailed, specific stuff that's focused to their profession, so they can really apply it in detail. So the 3 modules that we rolled out were basic science of climate change and policy understanding. Then we rolled out, this is the Environment Agency's carbon footprint. These are the kind of things we do. These are the kind of things we could do. And then the 3rd module was very much about individual contribution. What can you do at home? What can you do in your personal life? So the next stage really will be to go into that for specific professions.
That's fascinating. And why did you choose the whole organization, or as many as possible? Like, what was the driver there for you, and why did everyone need to know about it, did you feel?
It's a big connected system, right? So fundamentally, everyone at the Environment Agency has a sustainability job or a climate change job. Our accountants do. They're greasing the wheels that allow us to do things that make us more sustainable. So they need to understand the why, because when you understand the why, it makes everything else flow a little bit more easily. So we took the view that we needed to do it to everyone, and not do it to everyone. That's a terrible way of putting it. Offer it to everyone. We didn't do it to anybody.
I think it's about empowering people. For me, I would say,
Yeah.
like if you connect all the dots, it's how do we empower people to make better decisions in an organization?
Exactly. And we've had some lovely examples where I've had people from different bits of the business phone me up saying, we've been asked to do this thing. And one of the IT engineers phoned me up and say, we've been asked to increase the data rate transfer on the USB port. I'm properly in the realms of talking about stuff I don't really understand now. But to do so, I'd have to turn up the power requirements, and we'd do it across all 11,000 laptops. But that's going to have an impact on CO2. So I want to be able to say no, but I want your permission, Simon, that it's okay to say no. And I was like, it's not my place to give permission, but I love the fact that you've thought that through and thought, is there a different way we can do this? And there was. So instead of turning it up for 11,000 people, they just gave that small team that needed to do huge amounts of data work a different sort of standalone solution.
I love that. And when you're sharing about that, what I'm feeling is, or what I'm thinking, what's creating inside me is, often signs of good leadership or signs of well-run organizations are creative ideas for solutions can come from anywhere within the organization. It's not a challenge, but something I notice is that maybe perhaps sometimes people won't be able to get sign off or think it's important for the whole organization to be carbon literate. They might only just educate the numbers that they think are working specifically on sustainability, or have sustainability as a 20 or 10% of their time. But this is a really clear idea and example as to why if the whole organization is empowered, then much better results happen.
And one of the key things we did actually was, my team did it first as a bit of, crash test dummies, putting that to one side. We got the executive to do it first. So the chief executive and his reports did it first. And then they told everyone how good it was. And, and they went on and on and on about it. The other, this is classic. The other good thing we did, we had a good data and metrics strategy alongside it. So you could see, we drove a bit of competition between teams, around completion rates. But having that leadership from the top, and our chief executive was brilliant. He said, wow, I learned loads. I thought I knew quite a lot about this, but actually I learned loads. I'd really encourage you to go and learn loads as well. That was really powerful.
We were touching on human psychology before, and I think safety and fear come into some of the elements of climate. So if we fear something too much, maybe we shut down. If we don't feel safe talking about something, maybe we go to what feels safe. And so within that context, people that are feeling unsafe or fearful are much less likely to feel part of both building the future, but also part of the movement to build it. And therefore less positive about the journey, and perhaps somewhat friction in terms of all us moving there. And feeling a sense of awareness, knowing, knowledge, understanding of the challenge and the opportunity they could play feels fundamental in dissolving both the fear or the need for safety around those.
Yeah, one of the key things actually on that feelings point was, we've got a fairly well switched on organisation that generally understands that, the climate's changing and that's not a good thing, and we're going to be in a bad place. One of the best things was that climate literacy did for us was it enabled everyone to see how they could play a little part in it. And suddenly I could almost hear that collective sigh of relief of, oh yeah, I can do a thing. You know, okay, I don't build flood schemes and I'm not a designer and I'm not an engineer, but I can do a thing in IT, or actually I might be able to do something in finance. We could build carbon into when we do the annual report and accounts, you know, yada, yada, yada. And that was great.
What I love that, because I think typically, perhaps before, carbon literacy would have been seen as what can you do in your personal actions? And what's much more interesting, of course, personal actions are important, but what's much more interesting is what can you do within the realm of your role? What can you do that can inspire others within the organization? What can we do with the structure of our organization, with the decisions we're making on a daily basis? Because that's fundamentally where I think change will happen.
Yeah. And it was really, it was a luxurious position for me to be in, right? In many senses, it's a privileged position as a sustainability professional in an organization. It was lovely to be in that position where I could push people to say, are you sure that's challenging enough? So when I did the session for the executive, I don't mind saying it had to be on Teams because it was sort of the back end of COVID. I said, I'm looking at the 9 faces on screen here that could probably affect one of the biggest changes to what we do around climate change in the UK. So just have that as your context before you come up and tell me, well, you know, I'm going to send a few less emails.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And I'm very interested in that. Like, what's the highest impact of our actions? What are we focusing on? How do you orientate the mindset of everyone within an organization to have that way of feeling and thinking about?
Well, that's a challenge, right? Isn't it? And there's a balance to strike between, because, you know, there's a risk, isn't there? If you go, every action that you do has got to be the most impactful thing. And on the one hand, it kind of has. But on the other hand, that can paralyze people to like, I'm not sure what the very best thing to do. And, you know, some days doing something is fine. And on other days, you go, right, this is the thing. I'm going to knock it out of the park on this. And it's going to be the best thing I could possibly do in this space.
And you're also thinking as well about that, because you've got the strategy, you've got the vision, you and your team are spending time.
I'm going to show my age here now. I often think sometimes as a sustainability professional, I have like one of those old school graphic equalizers where I'm just turning levels up and down depending on what the appetite or the capacity for the organization is at that time. We'll tweak that up and we'll tweak that down a bit, and so we don't break it.
And so, okay, so we've explored carbon literacy. Carbon budget's interesting. Not so many people have managed to put a carbon budget into their organization, and perhaps less have managed to put it into the operational units. It's definitely an opportunity space. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, how you put it in place? I'm very interested in the structure of these things. So not just we did it, but like what was required to get it to happen? What were some of the intricacies of it? What are some of the behind the scenes if we know about it as a topic, but we're a sustainability professional looking to understand more that we might not know already about it?
So it came about when I was writing our net zero roadmap. So we're here, we need to get to here. What are all of the steps that we need to do to get there? One of my fundamental principles in doing that was assigning the actions to the people who had the ability to deliver them to affect the change. And occasionally we'd get stuck. We've got a really complex organisation. You'd be like, oh, who owns those emissions? And we'd get stuck. And whenever we got stuck, we came back to a principle of how does the money flow? Who controls the budget? How does the money flow? And every single time that helped us go, oh, right, yeah, okay, well, the emissions belong there then. And the penny dropped with me as we were doing that. I was like, yeah, it works because we make decisions around cash. But if we make decisions around carbon in the same way, that should start leading us to good outcomes. And I suppose the other bit that is allied to that. So net zero climate change, notwithstanding everything we've just said about human behavior, it's a numbers game, right? We've got so much carbon we can put into the atmosphere before we're stuffed. I don't know why I'm laughing. I'm nervously laughing.
We're British. Black humour is.
Yeah. So we've got a finite amount. So we need something that keeps a track of the numbers to make sure we don't blow our envelope, right? Just like spending money. So that was the rationale for carbon budgets. I'm like, okay, it seems to work from a decision-making point of view. We know we've got a finite amount that we need to stick to. So against our science-based target, we're like, okay, well, this is our operating envelope. How do we make sure we stay within that? So very simply, we started at the corporate total and then we just began allocating it around the business in line with the work that they've got to do. And the reason it's a budget and not just a target, because that's a question I often get asked, because targets tend to be like a 1-year target. The budget we've allocated over 10 years. So, and the nature of our work, which spreads more than 12 months, because it takes 6 years or more to build a flood scheme. You might go over 1 year, but then be under the next year and then over the year after that. But as long as the overall operating envelope is within what we need, then we're in a good place. The other thing that does, it really gives that empowerment to people who are making decisions. You know, they're not hamstrung to that artificial 12-month window. They can decide, okay, I want to spend more of my carbon budget on this, but I accept that I have to spend less on that. I'll give you a slightly silly example to illustrate the point. One of the directors came to me recently and said, my team's going to have to start driving a lot more because we've got this new directive, and it means we're going to have to drive a lot more. So our carbon emissions are going to go up. You know, there's a bit of me that was like, well, not necessarily, because the fleet will be electrified pretty soon. Anyway, putting that to one side, I was like, yeah, that's fine. It'll just mean you'll have to reduce it somewhere else. So your teams are going to have to look after their stuff and not go through as much clothing and as much IT and other things that impact on your carbon budget. So that's cool. If that's the direction that you want to take, it allows that flexibility rather than being that, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can only do that.
That's like how I would like to parent.
Yeah,
we're all children that have grown up, right?
So, yeah.
That's interesting. And so what were the firstly, do you have a price for carbon? Is there a carbon price internally?
Yes, in some instances, but by and large, we've got a tonnage of carbon. You know, we know an amount of tons.
So it's completely decoupled from money. It's only focused on, okay, interesting.
And so, you know, of the 273,000 tons, so much is allocated here, you know, so much is allocated to the flood directorate, and then so much is allocated to this portion and this portion and this portion, down to team leader level.
And so you've allocated the carbon budget through different business units down to team leader level. How have you calibrated that allocation?
So against our science-based target, we know what our starting point is and we know what our end point is. And we've got a trajectory that goes, you know, from one to the other. I mean, it's not like that. It's kind of like this, but that goes from one to the other. And that area under the curve is what we know we can allocate across the years to different business units. And it gets smaller and smaller and smaller each year.
Because a lot of if we look at something, for example, like climate adaptation and other areas as well, I would imagine, just guessing, that your carbon budget has these very big kind of uses of carbon to put something in that then is there for a longer amount of time.
Yeah, so the assets we build typically have a 100-year life. And so we have got spikes in it, which is why having it over a long period of time as opposed to year-on-year targets. So for instance, just down from here, we'll be building the Bridgewater Barrier, which is a multi-million-pound flood scheme. I think that's due for completion in about 2030. If we allocated all of the carbon for that in 2030, we'd just see an enormous spike. Whereas if we're spreading it over the years.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting conversation, because I'm having conversations with others where they were thinking about whether to put it in now and just to know that they'd put it in now and then, because the spend is now, right? but you're spreading it over years.
The spend is over, I mean, it takes 6 years to build the thing. Yeah.
That's interesting. So you're not doing football accounting. Well, so football accounting is when I buy a player and then I account for it over 5 years so that I can get through fair play. But actually what we're seeing is that's not very fair. And I think with carbon, there's no lies, right? So with carbon, it has to be, you've used the carbon in that moment and that's what you've done.
And that's what we're trying to do. So, I mean, the build project will literally be over that period of time. This is one of our biggest challenges, is around data. But as much as possible, we'll collect real-time data from site around how much concrete have you poured this month, how much steel have you used, how much fuel did the vehicles use on site. And we'll gather that in and it'll go into our reporting. Which very neatly circles back to one of your initial statements around being able to drive the circular economy, and actually highlights the extreme importance of having low carbon methods and low carbon materials for the work that you're doing. Yeah, and so that needs to come through in the way we design things. So having things that we can either disassemble and reuse later, because once you've built something, most of the utility of the carbon is locked up in there. The worst thing we can do is allow it to fail and, not maintain it, allow it to fail and then have to build a new one again. You lose all the utility of that carbon. Whereas if we can design it in a way that we can disassemble components out of it and then just reinstall new components, that kind of mindset of way of thinking will massively reduce the carbon impact that we have to have in the future. That'll be in 30 years' time or whatever.
Back to the carbon budget. What were the first steps in getting that across the line in the organization? What did you have to do and prove?
One of the biggest things we did was we showed we'd done our homework well. We'd worked out the amount, the total budget, and then we'd done a sensible sort of allocation of it as the first pass. And the single best thing we did, actually, we collaborated across the business. So really early on, we got finance involved, said, come and help us with this. You've got an army of accountants who are used to moving money around, used to reallocating budget, used to reporting. We need to be doing the same. And actually, the long-term plan is to transition it to them. So rather than my team do it, our accountants will deal in money and carbon. And that's really exciting for them. From that literacy point of view, they're like, I can contribute to the climate emergency now. So that's great. But we also got HR involved. We also got business planning involved, sort of thinking about allocations for future years. So we've got a real cross-business team involved. And that meant to design how it works, essentially. So that meant when I took it to decision makers, to the executive, we're like, we all think this is a good idea and we've built it together. And it was lovely. So no matter what question we got asked, we're like, yeah, we've thought of that. Or I went, Phil's thought of that. Pat's thought of that. Kate's thought of that. It was lovely, actually. Slightly late, we brought business planning into it, and we should have brought them in earlier. And one of the guys took me aside and went, I don't say this lightly, but this is one of the best collaborative, cross-business, zero ego teams, virtual teams I've ever worked in. He's like, everyone just wants to do a really good job and there's no agenda. And it was really lovely. And I think some of that built off the back of the carbon literacy work that we did. So everyone suddenly went, here's a thing I can do. And it was brilliant. When you build these virtual teams, I know from experience, sometimes, you need 10 people and you get 10 people at the start and then it whittles down to 8 and then 7 and you're left with a hardcore of 6 at the end. This grew. We started with 10 and then we were kind of at 11 and 12. And it was a brilliant piece of cross-business collaboration.
Really lovely. Yeah. And really then you can feel the buy-in from doing that as a process. And I love the idea of retooling is the wrong word, but reframing or bringing in the skills and aptitudes of those individual roles of people that have gone into accounting or finance or HR where they've developed a certain set of skills and then enabling them to use those skills for other things that they feel empowered or they feel desired to do. And so carbon literacy, carbon accounting, strategy, what's next?
Oh, good question. I think making it really land. There's a difference between, so on the budgets point, for instance, we've been talking a lot recently about the so what. So we've designed the architecture really well and we've designed the processes really well. One bit of the equation we need to stick in there is the so what. So linking it to executive reward. And the same way their financial budget is linked to executive reward, their carbon budget will be as well. The whole business has to transform. It goes back to what our chief of staff said about, this changes everything. But then one of the key things I think is, so at the moment we're in that mindset of we build flood schemes to protect people and lives and livelihoods from flooding. We design fairly traditional schemes and we use traditional materials, but we're starting to use low carbon materials, which is good. What's even better is using nature in the first place. So increasing the amount of natural flood management we do to deliver our outcomes, slowing the flow of water down. And you get, multiple benefits. So it cleans up water quality, slows the flow of water, which reduces flood risk, provides green space for people to go into. Now, I know it is not the be all and end all. And we have got limited space on this island, and there are some high energy environments, lower Thames estuary, where that is not going to be an option. But there are plenty of other geographies within the country where that really is an option. And that is something we're really mindful of, expanding that. There are some things that need to happen to really enable that. So being able to stack the benefits of that. So, we've got the benefit of flood risk, and if we can stack biodiversity benefit on top of that and water quality benefit on top of that, and so on and so forth, it makes those kind of schemes much more viable from an economic point of view.
That's fascinating. And as you were talking, I think sometimes when we think about indigenous or ancient ways of doing things, it's often easier to think beyond our island rather than what's happened within England, for example. So I remember growing up on a farm, and they used to lay hedges next to us, and some of those old skills still existed. And I think now we've seen more of an interest in previous ways of doing things, learnt ways of doing things, generational ways of doing things, and industry and infrastructure sort of distance us from that. Since the Industrial Revolution, there's been a sort of a distancing, and can we throw concrete at it, which is in some ways good, and in some ways perhaps there's a better way. So I love hearing you sharing about bringing in some of those other elements of how we might manage, depending on what feels right and relevant.
Yeah, and that, I think in that there's a time and a place for concrete, albeit low carbon concrete, and then there's a time and a place, of course, there needs to be a time and a place for nature. And we've got lots of examples where, we've stabilised riverbanks with willow spiling, and the willow continues to grow. But a really important thing in that is that we take the community with us on that. And it depends on their context, right? If they've been flooded, and that's devastating, there's no getting away from that. That is a devastating impact on anybody. If you then say to them, okay, well, we're going to put a flood scheme in for you, we could build a concrete wall here, or we could plant some trees on those hills over there. I'm guessing most people will take the concrete wall, right? Because that seems far more assured.
Well, actually, I was just going for the trees, but yeah, maybe.
You might, but our experience is it's changing. But the thing to take away from that, for me, is we need to get better with our storytelling and our evidence, and take people with us. And actually, it's not a binary choice. It's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
It's probably a smaller concrete wall with less resources in it, and it's smaller because of the trees we've planted up there.
That feels there again like another literacy or education piece, but also it feels like it's leading into green skills and the rediscovering of skills. And again, maybe people outside of the organization or within the organization being empowered to play a role, and the refreshing or the reinvigorating of those natural environments where previously people may have moved towards towns, actually becoming much more vibrant spaces, which when we talked about degrowth earlier on, like that's the benefit of the investment in society and culture and in all of these other improvements, is you get these co-benefits, don't you?
There's something really interesting as well. We sometize talk about our organisation. You can probably tell I've described a bit of an almost, not a dichotomy, it's not a dichotomy, but almost two sets of people in the Environment Agency. The flood risk engineers who protect people from the environment, and then the environmental regulation side who protect the environment from people. And actually, we need to come together much more like that around it. There's some really interesting examples on the flood side around resilience. So accepting that the water might come into the house, but being able to recover from it within 2 days. There's some great examples in Cornwall, actually, of coastal communities around Looe, and their houses are designed in a way that they know on a astronomically high tide with a wind in a certain direction, they're going to get water into their kitchen. It will come in, but it's designed in a way that the plug sockets are halfway up the wall. There's a granite floor. They can just sweep it out afterwards. And, they are recovered within 24 hours. So we don't have to keep building the walls higher and higher and higher. It's about learning to live with nature a little bit as well, I think.
Yeah, I grew up on a house that was raised 2 meters above the ground because we lived on a floodplain. So we were used to every year it flooding at least once or twice, and it was reasonably fun. The sheep and goats went onto the roofs, and we sort of dealt with whichever fish moved between whichever ponds, So I think typically humans have lived in extreme environments or different environments or changeable environments. And so perhaps then we were more intuitively in flow, whereas there's been this sort of desire to control our environment or to have dominion over our environment that perhaps then now leads us to realize actually we we can't and we don't, especially if we live in excess. And
yeah, I spent a year in New Zealand, and my overwhelming impression of the South Island, which I loved, I came away with the feeling that nature was in control, and we were the kind of there living with nature rather than we were in control and we were controlling nature. And occasionally it came and kicked us in the butt, which is, we seem to be more in that space in this country.
well, we've forgotten that we are nature. It's fallen away from us. And so if we put concrete around us and we live in houses and we travel in cars, we lose that connection. We lose that intuitive sense of what's around us. We probably don't know about the river. So I think I'm curious about what that feels like as we move closer to have an intuitive understanding of nature. I think carbon helps us understand our impact on nature in one particular way, which has an impact on everything else. But I think there's other elements that I think as a movement we'll start to embrace more. We're seeing it now, aren't we? Biodiversity and nature coming more and more in, and TNFD, but that will then hopefully create a groundswell of focus on nature literacy and nature connection, not just knowing about it, but actually feeling and being in it as well.
And actually, I mean, it might sound a strange thing for the Environment Agency, but we are now designing our nature literacy module off the back of the success of the carbon literacy. And, different people will be in very different places because we've got some absolute ecologist experts. I feel like I'm beating up on finance here, finance guys who aren't particularly nature literate, but we know it's a rich vein to tap into because of the carbon work.
You mentioned that you would like to share a little bit about Protect Your Winters. Is it Protect Your or Protect Our Winters?
Protect Our Winters, POW.
And an organisation I love dearly, and so yeah.
Yeah, so I get to wear a second hat outside of work. So I chair Protect Our Winters UK, set up in 2007 by US pro snowboarder Jeremy Jones, who saw the impact that climate change was going to have on the sport that he dearly loved. So set up in the US, and now there are a bunch of European chapters, so Austria, France, Switzerland, Finland, Denmark. I won't, I'll never name them all. And so I get to chair the UK one. So our mission as Protect Our Winters is to help passionate outdoor people become effective advocates for systemic solutions to climate change. So sport and sustainability is an area I'm really passionate about. There's really good evidence from likes of Harvard Business Review that some of the most influential people in the world are sports stars. People listen to sports stars. Look at the influence people like Marcus Rashford were able to have in this country. There's a really obvious link with power to winter sports, but actually, so some of those other chapters I talked about focus almost entirely on winter sports. In the UK, because we don't have those alpine communities as such, we have branched out into outdoor sports like mountain biking, climbing, hill walking that are also going to be impacted. There's really good evidence that about 25 million people a week, I think it is, access the outdoors. Their potential enjoyment in future is going to be impacted if we don't address climate change. So some of what we do is about helping educate that community, helping them understand what it means for the thing that they love, and helping them understand what they can do about it. So we have a big campaign running at the moment called Send It for Climate, where we are literally, you send a big jump, but we are literally sending postcards to the Secretaries of State for Climate Change, Shadow Secretary of State for Climate Change, to try and influence both of their manifestos so that there are options for people to vote at the next general election that are climate conscious. And that's going really well.
That's fantastic. And it leans into the fact that it's going to take all of us in all ways working together, collaborating, influencing where we can, changing where we can, being mindful where we can, if we're going to stand any chance of transforming our world to be equitable.
One of the really nice things we've seen, so we do quite a lot of carbon literacy at POW, is that, and I guess this is obvious, but sometimes you only realise things when they're right in front of you, that as POW we speak a language that allows us to access some organisations that perhaps wouldn't traditionally listen. Like, oh, these guys ride snowboards, these guys mountain bike, and they're talking about climate. Maybe we should listen to them because that's our thing. So, whereas if I think you just pitched up as an environmental NGO, not interested in listening to that. I want to go mountain biking and snowboarding. Thanks very much. So that's a really nice angle for us, that we feel trusted because we speak their language, we know their world.
And you were a keen snowboarder, I noticed, maybe?
Yeah. My time out in New Zealand that I talked about, I spent 4 months snowboarding out there. But yeah, I loved snowboarding. It's a real privilege. You know, you get to just feel free and play with the mountain. And I took our little boy skiing for the first time last year. I really had a real moment of thinking, God, I hope he can do this when he's my age. You know, I hope we've still got resorts that are below 2,000 meters, and it's not looking like we will at the moment. And that's why the pressing need for action is there, because otherwise they'll just become the really high level resorts that are really exclusive to rich white people. And that's not what we want. We want everybody to be able to access the outdoors.
And resorts are good. Also, the other elements of having lost the snow or had massive glacial melts, or and then the impact that will have on both the world and communities and the natural environment and natural habitats as well. Pleasure to connect with you. Pleasure to hear. I'm always very interested in getting into the details of how and what's happening in organizations. I think it's really helpful. We talked about collaboration at the beginning. I think one of the things that we can do really well is tell the stories of what we're doing to each other and be inspired by those, and then learn, oh, okay, well, great. Well, we can talk to that person about that, or that's something interesting that they're doing. We could do that in our organization as well. So
no one's got all the answers, right? So, you know, we've got some things that have worked well and others that haven't, and I'll cherry pick bits from whoever I can.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very happy to share.
Please like, rate and share this widely on your social channels. The more people that we can welcome to join us on the journey and support the change makers we champion, the faster we can combat climate change, battle biodiversity loss, and co-create a future we can all love.
Where do we go next? What questions did this spark for you? Would you like to know more about a particular topic? Who shall we adventure to? What shall we ask them? Where shall we go? What shall we build? How shall we do this together? Do you have any questions or comments? Join the Future Planet community of action at futureplanet.love to sign in, sign up, and get involved. Together, we can.